I want to have a conversation about what are the Jewish ethics of power. And by the way, it's not simple, because as Michael Walzer has pointed out, the fact that the halachic tradition developed for 2,000 years in a period of powerlessness means that our discourse around just war, for example, is very thin. Like, it's not like the Catholics who spent thousands of years thinking about questions of power. They abused it, of course.
Right.
So I think it's actually really, really hard, but those are the conversations we need to have.
Rabbi Shai Held, it's great to have you here on this podcast. We're doing this live at the Z3 Conference 2023. It's a great honor. I consider you one of my rabbis, so it's just a great honor to have you here at the conference with your keynote and now this conversation.
It's a privilege to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So this is a Z3 podcast, and what we typically do, these happen often in between the conference, and what we try to do is to have similar or meaningful conversations around a variety of topics, not dissimilar from what happens at the conference outside, and so we can use other platforms to reach people, if it's a podcast, if it's video, etc. So that's the context for this, and we're thrilled that you're here. So we'll see how this goes. So I want to start with just like how you're doing. I like that, how Janine started, how are you doing?
I think that my primary experience these days is how quickly I cycle through emotions, like incredible grief one moment, indignation the next moment, a sense of deflation. It's just a very intense set of experiences. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot is that spiritually, we have to cultivate capaciousness, the ability to hold a lot of different feelings and experiences at the same time, because it's just a dizzying time in so many ways. I think also, just thinking a lot about the immense loss. I think I might have told you this, but Ilan Troen, who's a professor of Israel studies at Brandeis and Ben Gurion, who I've known since I was a child, his daughter and son-in-law died lying on top of their son when a gunman entered their home. And I don't know, I just can't stop thinking about them. And the Goldberg Polans, who I know, and Hirsch, and what is it like for a month, obviously to be a hostage, but then to be a parent of a hostage and know that you have no idea how they are and where they are. It's a lot to carry right now to be a Jew.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah, you touched upon that a little bit in the keynote, related about how difficult it is to be a Jew in this moment. And there's so many angles of why that is, right? There's the physical element, for sure, of just being threatened, and then there's the emotional, which is what you're kind of pointing to now. And so I want to, if you can maybe give us a little more insight into how do you think about, how do you cope with it? You are a rabbi, you have many students, right? Maybe it's not like it's not a shul, but it's still a community.
Right.
It's still a community, and you have to, there's elements of self-care, right? There's elements of providing for others, the pastoral role of a rabbi, and I think it'd be very helpful for our audience to hear a little bit about that, if you're willing to share something.
About the self-care specifically?
Yes, also the self, how do you, the truth is that for both of them, because we have folks who are in leadership roles, right? So they have to do also self-care, and they also have others. But I think all of us, in a way, are caregivers, right? No one is entirely on their own. So I think, it's a matter of scale maybe, but still, I think both of those, insight maybe, for just like a glimpse into some things that you've been finding helpful.
Right, I would just add to the mix that I think it's also an incredibly complicated time to be a parent and to figure out, bracket how much harder it is to be a parent in Israel right now. Let's just sort of stipulate that. Yeah. But to be a parent here and to feel on the one hand that you want your child to feel safe, and on the other hand that you want your child to have some sense of what's happening to our people right now. Yeah. And it's such a complicated dance, and obviously each child is totally different, but it's exhausting. Being a parent is always exhausting. Being a parent right now, I find just really, really hard. I just want to say that because I think maybe that's helpful for people to know that you're not alone in finding this moment really, really hard. I think I would go back for a minute to what I said a moment ago about capaciousness. I think one of the things that I've been trying to do when I feel this overwhelming flow of emotion, anger, confusion, despair, is just sort of to take a deep breath and say, yeah, this also. It's just to hold it. You don't need to chase it away. You don't need to act on it. You just need to find a way to hold it. And one of the things I think that becomes possible is that you, in saying this also, you're not fully identified with it, right? I am anxious, but I am not my anxiety. I am despairing, but I am not my despair. I'm still, right? There's some self there that is not completely, immersed or drowning, maybe it's a better word, in that feeling. I do think you're right that caretakers need care. One of the things that I would say to rabbis and educators is it's okay for you to need a rabbi too. It's okay to, I think the second Shabbat after it happened, I approached Rabbi Gordon Tucker, with whom I go to shul, and I just said, can we just go for a walk later and just, and it was just very helpful for me to be able to do that, where it was a situation where I wasn't expected to be on. I could just talk about. Yeah. So I think, rabbis need to carve out the space for that and not to feel guilty about needing it. Needing it is part of what it means to be human. And that's not true only for rabbis, obviously. It's true for educators. It's true for parents. Talk to other parents, right, with whom you're on some level, in, a similar values universe, a similar, psychological language. Just talk about how it's hard. Like there's company in that is really precious.
Yeah, I find that incredibly helpful. I know that for us here, being Israeli in this area, there's on the one hand a lot of comfort that we find with our local Israeli compatriots, I'd say, but also we all are importing a lot of our angst and the baggage that we have as Israelis and what we I think there's different layers of guilt and shame that come with that. Right, like our families are there. Everybody has family, right? But the degree of it, I think, is different. And I think what I'm trying to say is that it's so helpful, right, to be with peers. And also, I think that what I find, and I'm curious how this sits with you, is also like some perspective. And so maybe someone who is actually not from the same kind of.
Right. It's interesting. Personally, I have found it helpful in these few weeks that I'm married to someone who does not have the same kind of Israeli connection that I do. I was raised by Israelis. We spoke Hebrew at home. Yoram Gaon was the soundtrack of my childhood, And my wife is completely, don't misunderstand, she's devastated by what's happening, but there's a little bit more remove, and I find like I can sort of take comfort in like just for a minute retreating into her remove.
A little bit of distance.
Just a little bit of distance, right? Yeah. Which I most of the time don't feel at all. I like to joke, I could tell you anything that has gone on Reshet Bet in the last 24 hours because it's on all the time, right? It's completely crazy, right? Yeah. And my wife has been helpful to me saying, are you sure you need to listen to that when you say you're taking a break, yeah. Right? And so that's helpful, to let someone remind you that nobody can do this 24 hours a day. And yes, there are feelings of guilt of what, Israelis don't have a choice and the parents of the hostages don't. Okay, that's also true. Yeah. But, you're in the situation that you're in. That's the only situation that you're in.
And you're not making it easier for them.
Right, exactly.
Right? Like we feel often, or we think that we're helping them bear, to rabbis, right? But bear their cross, right? But we're not. We're not really.
Not really, right. I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a hard world the Kadosh Baruch Hu has put us in.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot to carry right now.
There's a lot to carry, yeah. Are there any, because of dealing with the conference, I'm totally like bottling out all pushing it into like my growing collection of pet ulcers, right? But like pushing it all down, suppressing it, and trying to figure out. But I'm just interested, because I find in Dafka in these moments, we started the day, Shai Weingarten read that Kaddish, right? About
a really devastating piece. I hadn't heard it before.
Yeah, the absence of God, and on the one hand, it very much resonates for me. It resonated because like where, and similar questions have come up in the past and will continue to. But I also want to hold, right, this ability of saying how can relying on a belief, right, or a theology of sorts can be helpful in these moments, and how do we think about them? So I'm not looking to do like a whole theodicy thing here,
Right.
You know,
of course.
but just like is it a prayer or something specific that you found helpful, or maybe not? Maybe like, you know what, this is not my pedagogy in this moment.
Yeah, it's a really interesting and difficult question. I think that I might say a couple of things here. One is that I have found the 2 chapters of Tehillim that are most commonly associated with times of crisis. Psalm 121, Esainai el Ha'arim, and 130, Mima Makim Karaticha Hashem. So Psalm 130, Mima Makim, is like, on some level, if you think about the meaning, it's very problematic. It's all about how I'm suffering because of my sins, so please God forgive me, and then you'll redeem me. But I've come to realize that there's something about the sound that it feels almost like a mantra. And it has given me personally a lot of comfort knowing that for thousands of years, I mean, Psalm 130 already in the Mishnah is associated with crisis, which is, I assume, means it probably goes back to Beit Sheni, to the Second Temple. The fact that for thousands of years, Jews who felt despair said these words, I find that like holds me a little bit. It doesn't solve my problems. Yeah. It's certainly not a theodicy. It's none of those things. Yeah. But it's like, oh, in 1550, my great whoever who was, afraid of a Cossack, might have davened these words. And somehow I just take comfort in what it means to be part of a family that kind of exists over time. Throughout time. Yeah. So that's one thing that I have found helpful. I also, I struggle with this because some days it means everything to me and other days it feels trite to me. So it's like I never know what's gonna surface for me. But on the one hand, this feels like another experience of the absence and the silence of God. And on the other hand, I just watch what people have done for each other. And it feels like a signal of transcendence in some way. Like, how do people do this? Right? I mean, in Israeli society, everything from retired generals getting in their car, driving south and liberating their grandchildren. I mean, look, it's just hard to fathom, right? To the much more day-to-day things like bringing meals to each other and just, sit. I was thinking about the video when Rachel and John Goldberg Poland were going to New York and how that neighborhood in Baca just basically, they all came out and were just greeting them. Yeah. It's so like, that stuff feels like a revelation to me. Yeah. It's not an argument or anything like that, but there's something that feels like it reveals the face of God in that way. Yeah. And that's like very, very moving to me.
Yeah. I find that as you're speaking, I'm like, I'd say maybe a trope, or not a trope is not the right word, but I think a theme that I very much connect with, of godliness being found in the other and the interaction. So it makes the way you're describing it, it makes a lot of sense to me that when humans connect, that's where you see the godliness. And then in the moment of violence, when they're the worst to each other, then there is no God, right? And that's kind of like just that, to me, is like, oh, that's actually, of course there's no, right, divine in that moment, because humans are being
right.
barbaric.
I mean, the person who I find really helpful on this is Martin Buber's language of the notion that there is a space that he calls the between, das Zwischen, right? There's you and there's me, and there's something here. And in the here, when you and I are both really here, that's the revelation of God's face in some way. Yeah. That's a very moving thing. And violence is the opposite of that. Yeah. Violence is about, on some level, saying, I don't see you. Yeah. I'm invested in not. I can't see you right now. Yeah. So in a way, then, so like, where's God? Of course, it's not, like, that's exactly the point, right? Right. That's if you want to use traditional language. In those moments, we send God into exile. Oh, yeah. Which is such a powerful image, for. It's on the one, it's devastating, this idea of God in exile, but it's comforting because, to me, I find some comfort in it because I think that it doesn't explain anything, right? But it at least addresses the absence of it, and that like it's interesting because Heschel says at one point, something like, I'm probably getting this wrong, but some people think the idea of God being with us in our suffering isn't worth very much. But for many of us who went through what we went through, that is like the only source of comfort there is. It's like, that like God is there too. Shchinta begaluta, right? The divine presence is in exile too. I completely just butchered that quote, but that's the...
We'll put in the description, we'll put a correction in the citation.
Yeah. But that's the idea, and I think there's... I guess I relate to that some of the time, right? A God who is not going to save me, but is going to be there with me.
So I want to shift a little bit, because I think that you and I talked about this a little bit, very briefly, and something that, for me, I find, when I reflect back on where I grew up, right, my upbringing and the high school that I went to, in particular, not after I went to Madagid, I was fine, but during the second Intifada, learning in Efrat, and I can see, myself included, how youth become radicalized very, very quickly, right? Because it's the the most basic is the science of hormones, right? And then there's just like the pain and suffering that you see, and on top of that, some theological language that kind of activates you in a way that you cannot see the world through any other lens. Right. And and that's something that I find so challenging. I think that what people misunderstand, and I think it's I don't know if it's obvious to the religious Zionist community, one that I come from. I don't know where I label myself these days, but certainly where I grew up. I don't know if they're self-aware of that, and I think that others on the outside don't even know that that's happening, right? They don't understand, what I'll call like applied messianism that comes through like of Kook's son's Beit Midrash, right, through Haramor and Merkaz, and I'm generalizing, right, but then through, et cetera, et cetera. But so how do we develop a new theology, or how do we think about asking questions that are still kind of in line with what we thought traditionally, using the same language, but that kind of like removes a lot what's the word? Our foot from the pedal, from the acceleration.
Right. I mean, I will say on this issue, I've always found Rabbi David Hartman very helpful. The idea that the religious significance of the state of Israel is in the challenge and the opportunity that it represents, not in some narrative about what God is doing right now. I mean, one of the things that I always find amazing is, all these rabbis who seem to think they know what God's policy prescription is for every like little corner of land somewhere. And it's just like, how do you know that? I think what Zionism represents from a religious perspective is a chance to play out Torah in an expansive way that is not possible in diaspora. That part of Shlilat HaGolah, that part of the negation of the diaspora, I think is actually fair, right? That, on a certain level, sure, I can write something about, what I think halakha would say about healthcare in America. But in Israel, Rav Yuval Sherlow can be part of the conversation, bringing halachic sources into a larger conversation, not determined by halakha, but influenced by Jewish culture. It is about the aspiration to build a Jewish society, in the Jewish and Judaic society in some sense. I think, look, the narrative of the state as messianic, first of all, I just think in a world in which people are slaughtered and you are obligated to go to war, in which just war, unjust war, that question we can bracket. But even in a just war where you're being forced to kill lots of people who are innocent civilians, to call that the messianic age is just to live in a kind of ashlaya, a kind of delusion. Like, what are you actually talking about? We do not live in a messianic world. We live in a broken reality that is called olam hazeh, that is this world. So I think what we need to do is just like begin a whole different conversation about how to talk theologically and spiritually about what Zionism represents, about the ethics of power, which I don't want to learn from Rav Tau and Rav Aviner, right? I don't want to learn that from them. I want to have a conversation about what are the Jewish ethics of power. And by the way, it's not simple, because as Michael Walzer has pointed out, the fact that the halachic tradition developed for 2,000 years in a period of powerlessness means that our discourse around just war, for example, is very thin. Like, it's not like the Catholics who spent thousands of years thinking about questions of power. They abused it, of course.
Right.
So I think it's actually really, really hard, but those are the conversations we need to have. And, the late Yoska Achituv, picking up on something that the philosopher Eliezer Goldman said, used to talk about that we need sionut datit bilti ashliyatit. We need a non-delusional religious Zionism. I think that's like a really important formulation. Like, it's not, we are not in, we're past the tracline, we're now on the inside of the mess. Just stop. It's like, like, wrestle with the reality. You have a state operating in history, in politics, right? Like, you have to have a theology that on some level relates to the reality that you're inhabiting.
Yeah. I mean, I find that personally very, very meaningful, and something that took me a while to kind of understand. I think that, the place where I got my first, like, my real wake-up call. I mean, it was high school, there was the army, fine, but then when I started Chovevei, I did a first year in Israel, and I went to some, like, they just wanted me to sit in the Beit Midrash, and I found some, like, weird yeshiva in Ra'anana. And we were studying Call of Torah. It's a book attributed to the Gaza and his students. And there's some stuff there, because the issue there, I find, and for these people, and this is where I don't know. Like, I agree with everything that you're saying, but they're like, yeah, but we're counting, we're calculating, we have numbers.
Yeah,
we have numbers, and and they use language, and it's very compelling for people who feel in a certain age who feel angry, and I'm just like wondering. So how do we introduce that in a world or in a place where that language is like almost passé? Right, like a language of theology in our world, right? Like it's so, I'll say it differently. The language of God and theology in Israel in particular is so limited to a very specific segment. They're never going to save themselves, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are secular versions of the conversation that we're having about obligation and responsibility, about what a people's destiny is. There are ways that we can talk that articulate some of these values in secular ways. And obviously, like, it's my hope that we develop, I talked about this earlier during my keynote, datiyut acheret, a different way of being religious. Yeah. I mean, look, if I were to be really honest, if the only two options for being religious that I saw much of the time were Tzvi Yehuda Kook and his circle, or Haredi culture, so I would also be Chiloni. I would also be secular because neither of those appeals to me. I understand they appeal to some people, but to me, so I think we need to create way more opportunities for Israelis to just encounter Torah and mitzvot and Judaism in general in just a much more expansive palette of ways.
Yeah. So I think, this is a good place to pitch for Hadar. With the work that you're doing in Israel. And I mean, I'm being a little silly, but I agree. And, I think that part of this is a la Z3, or what we talk about. I think that it's dafka, like the Torah of the diaspora, that can kind of be infused and kind of temper a little bit of what we're seeing, right? Of the powerlessness, and put that there. I think, we can talk about Micha Goodman and everything he's written, but there's a series of articles that he wrote a long time ago that became a base for a book later. And I know I'm not here to critique his work specifically, but he does talk about, and I don't think this is like his like idea, but it's where I've latched onto it, of like the reason why we were talked about being a minority on the eve of going into the land, right? And how do we have to remember that is exactly because of what happens when you take someone who's been so powerless for so long, put them in a sovereign context. Right, and then the brutality that can come with that. And I think that in the moment we are in, this is the opportunity for a relationship where communities will understand, right? What does it mean to work with others? What does it mean to be pluralist? What does it mean to work with other minorities? Not to be forceful, not to be, you don't have to use religion to. So that's where I see a lot of hope in institutions like Hadar or Pardes, or even you look at the initiatives on the ground. If it's the alternative kashrut and conversions and all those things, many of them are expats. Many of them are American expats, and they come and they bring some kind of like perspective of an outsider. I think that kind of helps.
Right. I think that's a great thing because, for a long time I worried that the main American Jewish contribution to religion in Israel was Kahanism. So now we have this alternative of a certain kind of humanistic frumkeit, right? A kind of being religious in a way that's humanistic and affirming of the Tzelem Elohim, the dignity of every person. You know, I think, I'm trying to think what the best way to say this is. It is certainly the case for me, personally, that my work on Hadar is about building what I mean by datiyut acheret. It's a datiyut that is really, on the one hand, committed to being totally immersed in tradition and committed to it and its authority, and at the same time, being completely committed to hearing the stories of people, even and especially people who are hurt by or alienated by Torah. I always say to people, when we build this Beit Midrash, there is no human experience that we will chase out of the room, right? You want to tell me that you're gay and Vayikra has ruined your life? I'm going to listen. You want to tell me that you're trans and you have no idea? I'm going to listen. You want to tell me that whatever the story might be, right? Because I had the experience as a kid in yeshiva day school of being told, that's not a question we ask. Be quiet.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in that, right? I want to create space where people can really feel heard, and understand that stems from a commitment to Torah, right? That we're committed to listening, Shema Yisrael, right? On some level, so that's I think really fundamental. Now, does Hadar have a contribution to make in Israel? So I don't have any kind of delusions of grandeur. I think the answer is we don't know, right? We are making a series of small contributions, learning with young adults, creating opportunities for a different kind of conversation about Torah and traditional texts. What it will mean down the road, I don't know. I don't know what Hadar means in North American Judaism, let alone in Israeli Judaism. I just know that I'm willing to stake my life on trying to build it.
Yeah. And thank goodness you are, because we need it. We need it, Shai.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So thank you for joining us. This has been a little taste of what we can cover, but I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Coming out here, schlepping for the keynote and the panel and now the podcast. It really means the world, and I'm looking forward to more conversations.
Amen. Looking forward to it too. Thank you.